History is often a grand stage, dominated by the most flamboyant of characters. We remember the conquerors, the builders of dazzling monuments, the figures whose names echo like thunder through the corridors of time. Yet behind these titans, there are often quieter, more foundational figures. These are the architects who lay the groundwork, the steady hands that steer the ship through storms, ensuring it reaches the next great harbour. Sultan Murad II was one such leader. He was a man of profound complexity, a warrior who yearned for peace, a ruler who twice gave up his throne. His story is not just one of battles and politics, it is the story of a soul grappling with duty, faith, and the immense weight of an empire on the cusp of greatness. He was the vital link, the strong bridge between the early Ottoman beylik and the world-changing empire his son would command. To understand the magnificent reign of Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who took Constantinople, we must first understand his father. Murad II was the Sultan who shaped the state, solidified the borders, and nurtured the very culture that would define the Ottomans for centuries to come. He inherited a kingdom fractured by civil war and external threats, but through sheer determination and astute leadership, he transformed it into a resilient and powerful state. His reign was a crucible, a period of intense testing that forged the Ottoman Empire into a force capable of reshaping the world map. He fought formidable enemies, from Hungarian crusaders to Venetian fleets and internal pretenders, each challenge met with a blend of military might and diplomatic cunning. His was a reign of consolidation, of building strength from within. His importance transcends the battlefield. Murad II was a man of deep culture and piety, a patron of the arts and sciences who filled his court with poets, scholars, and architects. He understood that an empire is built not only with swords and fortresses, but also with words, ideas, and beautiful buildings that reflect its soul. He oversaw the construction of mosques, bridges, and schools that not only served his people, but also broadcasted the power and sophistication of his dynasty. This cultural flowering was no mere decoration. It was a deliberate act of state-building, creating a shared Ottoman identity that would bind his diverse subjects together. He was a sultan who looked both inward to his faith and outward to the world, creating a legacy of piety and power. In this journey through his life, we will explore the man behind the title. We will walk through the palaces of Edirne and the battlefields of the Balkans. We will see how a young prince thrust into power navigated a treacherous world of betrayal and ambition. We will witness his struggles, his triumphs, and his extraordinary decision to abdicate in favor of his young son, only to be called back by the dire needs of his empire. Murad II's story is a compelling human drama, a testament to the idea that true greatness is often found not in the relentless pursuit of power, but in the steadfast fulfillment of duty. He was the unsung architect, the Sultan, who quietly, methodically, and brilliantly prepared the stage for one of history's most dramatic acts. Every great river begins as a small stream, its course shaped by the landscape it flows through. So it was with Murad II. Born in the year 1404 in the historic city of Amasya, his early life was moulded by the unique environment of this important Ottoman province. Amasya was more than just a city. It was the traditional training ground for Ottoman crown princes, a sancak where a young heir learned the intricate arts of governance, warfare and diplomacy, far from the distracting intrigues of the capital. It was here, amidst the rugged Anatolian landscape, dotted with ancient tombs and fortresses, that the young Murad began his education. He was not just learning from books, he was learning from the land and its people, understanding the rhythms of administration and the responsibilities of command. His father was Sultan Mehmed I, a ruler known as the second founder of the Ottoman state. Mehmed I had painstakingly stitched the empire back together after the devastating civil war known as the Ottoman Interregnum, a dark period of internal conflict that had nearly torn the dynasty apart. Young Murad grew up hearing the tales of this struggle, understanding that the unity of the empire was fragile and precious. His father's legacy was a powerful lesson in resilience and the constant vigilance required to hold the state together. Under the tutelage of seasoned administrators and military commanders, Murad learned to ride, to wield a sword, and most importantly, to think like a ruler. He was being shaped not for a life of ease, but for a life of service and command. The world Murad was born into was a place of constant motion and simmering conflict. To the west lay the Christian kingdoms of the Balkans, Hungary, Serbia, and the remnants of the Byzantine Empire, all wary and often hostile neighbours. To the east were other Turkish principalities in Anatolia, the Karamanids being the most persistent rivals, always ready to challenge Ottoman dominance. Murad's education in Amasya was therefore intensely practical. This was a hands-on apprenticeship in statecraft, designed to test his character and prepare him for the immense pressures of the Sultanate that awaited him. By the time he was a teenager, Murad was already an experienced governor and a capable military leader. This upbringing instilled in him a seriousness and a maturity beyond his years. Unlike a prince raised in the sheltered luxury of a central palace, Murad was intimately familiar with the challenges facing the empire at its frontiers. He understood the concerns of his soldiers, the needs of his provincial subjects, and the ever-present threat of his rivals. This early experience in Amasya was the furnace that forged the prince into the sultan he would become. Pragmatic, resilient, and deeply aware of the burdens of his inheritance. The boy who left Amasya was ready to rule. The year 1421 marked a sudden and dramatic turning point in Murad's life. His father, Sultan Mehmed I, died unexpectedly, leaving the still young prince to inherit the Ottoman throne. At just 17 years old, Murad II ascended to a position of immense power, but also one of extreme peril. The peace his father had so carefully constructed was paper-thin, and the vultures were already circling, sensing weakness in the transition of power. News of a sultan's death was a signal for rivals, both internal and external, to test the resolve of the new ruler. Murad had little time for mourning. His reign began not with celebration, but with the immediate and urgent need to defend his inheritance. The throne was his, but he would have to fight to keep it. The first and most dangerous challenge came from within his own family, a recurring theme in Ottoman history. The Byzantine Emperor, Manuel II, Palaiologos, ever the shrewd diplomat, saw an opportunity to destabilize his powerful Ottoman neighbor. He released a man named Mustafa Çelebi from his custody in Constantinople. This Mustafa claimed to be a long-lost son of a previous sultan, Bayezid I, and therefore a legitimate claimant to the Ottoman throne. Known to history as Düzmeçe Mustafa or the impostor Mustafa, he quickly gathered support from disgruntled nobles and mercenary forces. This was a direct assault on Murad's legitimacy, a move designed to plunge the empire back into the chaos of civil war from which it had only just emerged. Supported by Byzantine ships, and disillusioned Ottoman commanders, Mustafa crossed the Dardanelles and gained a swift foothold in the European provinces of the empire. He was a charismatic figure, and many flocked to his banner, believing his claim or simply hoping to profit from the ensuing chaos. For the young Sultan Murad II, this was his first great test. His own armies were hesitant, some even defecting to the pretender's side. It seemed as though his father's work was about to unravel completely. Murad had to act decisively, not just as a commander, but as a symbol of legitimate authority. He had to prove to his soldiers and his subjects that he, and not the charismatic pretender, was the rightful heir of the House of Osman. With a corps of loyal troops, Murad confronted the challenge head-on. He demonstrated a military acumen that belied his young age, outmaneuvering Mustafa's forces and rallying wavering commanders back to his cause. The campaign was swift and brutal. Murad eventually cornered the pretender in Anatolia, where his support base crumbled. Mustafa was captured, and in a clear message to all who would challenge the Sultan's authority, he was executed in 1422. By crushing this rebellion, Murad did more than just eliminate a rival. He asserted his own power and demonstrated that the Ottoman state would not be so easily broken. The boy Sultan had proven himself a king. Having vanquished the threat of the impostor Mustafa, Sultan Murad II was not granted a moment of peace. The Byzantine emperor's role in supporting the rebellion had not been forgotten. Murad saw this as a profound betrayal, an act of aggression that could not go unanswered. If Constantinople was to be a source of instability, a city that harbored pretenders and instigated civil wars, then it had to be neutralized. In 1422, fueled by a desire for retribution and strategic necessity, Murad marshaled his formidable army and laid siege to the ancient capital of the Byzantine Empire. The massive land walls of Theodosius, which had protected the city for 1,000 years, now faced the full might of Ottoman cannons and manpower. The siege was a monumental undertaking. Ottoman engineers built massive earthworks to bring their cannons to bear, and soldiers launched relentless assaults against the city's defenders. The Byzantines, though vastly outnumbered, fought with the desperation of a people defending their very existence. For them, Constantinople was not just a city. It was the heart of their world, the center of Orthodox Christianity. The siege raged on for months, a brutal and bloody affair. Murad even employed a charismatic dervish to inspire his troops, claiming prophecies of the city's imminent fall. Yet the legendary walls held firm, and the defenders, inspired by their emperor and their faith, repelled every attack. The city would not fall, not yet. Just as the pressure on Constantinople reached its peak, Murad received alarming news from Anatolia. A new rebellion had erupted, this time instigated by his own younger brother, Küçük Mustafa. Like the pretender before him, the 13-year-old prince was being used as a pawn by rival powers, particularly the Turkish Karamanid and Germianid Beyliks, who sought to weaken Ottoman control in the region. This forced Murad to make a difficult choice. He could continue the costly and uncertain siege of Constantinople, or he could turn back to Anatolia to quell the rebellion that threatened to split his empire in two. The internal threat was always the most dangerous one. Reluctantly, Murad lifted the siege of Constantinople and marched his army back across the Bosphorus. His campaign against his younger brother was swift and decisive, a sad but necessary act of state preservation. Küçük Mustafa was captured and executed, another tragic victim of the brutal politics of succession. Although Murad had failed to conquer Constantinople, his actions had profound consequences. He had secured his authority in Anatolia, punished the Byzantine emperor by capturing surrounding territories, and forced him into a new treaty that reduced Byzantium to little more than a vassal state, paying a hefty annual tribute. Murad had proven that any challenge to his rule, whether from a foreign emperor or his own blood, would be met with overwhelming force. After the dramatic events of 1422, Murad II's attention was firmly fixed on consolidating his power. The failed siege of Constantinople had been a lesson. The city was a formidable prize, but the foundations of the empire in Anatolia and the Balkans had to be rock solid before such an ambitious conquest could be successful. His first priority was to deal with the Turkish beyliks in Anatolia that had supported his rebellious brother. These principalities, like the Karamanlıları and Jeremianids, were a constant thorn in the side of the Ottomans. They saw themselves as rightful heirs to the Seljuk legacy in Anatolia and resented the growing dominance of the House of Osman. Murad knew that a divided Anatolia would always leave his empire vulnerable. His campaigns in Anatolia were a masterful blend of diplomacy and military force. He did not always seek outright conquest. In some cases, he used strategic marriages to absorb territories peacefully. For instance, he secured the lands of the Jeremianids through a marriage alliance, bringing their domains under Ottoman control without a single battle. This was a clever and cost-effective way to expand his power, preserving his armies for more stubborn foes. This method showed his preference for statecraft over bloodshed when possible, a sign of his maturing leadership. He was a builder as much as a conqueror, seeking to unite the Turkish peoples of Anatolia under a single, stable banner. However, where diplomacy failed, Murad did not hesitate to use his powerful army. The Karamanlıları, based in the strategic region around Konya, were his most persistent rivals. They repeatedly challenged Ottoman authority, forming alliances with the Ottomans' European enemies and attacking Ottoman lands whenever the Sultan was occupied in the Balkans. Murad led several campaigns against them, pushing them back and asserting his dominance. While he never fully extinguished the Karamanid state during his reign, he weakened it significantly, ensuring it could no longer pose a mortal threat to his empire. He was steadily, methodically transforming Anatolia from a patchwork of rival states into a unified Ottoman heartland. This process of securing Anatolia was crucial for the future of the empire. It provided a secure base of recruitment, resources, and political stability. With Anatolia pacified, the Sultan could turn his full attention to the Balkans without constantly looking over his shoulder. This strategic consolidation was one of Murad II's greatest, though often overlooked, achievements. He was transforming the Ottoman state from a frontier principality fighting on all sides into a true empire with a secure core and expanding frontiers. He was laying the deep and strong foundations upon which his son, Mehmed, would later build his legendary conquests. The road to the fall of Constantinople in 1453 was paved with Murad's patient and persistent campaigns in Anatolia decades earlier. By the year 1444, Sultan Murad II was a man weary of war. He had spent over 2 decades on the throne, a reign defined by constant campaigning, suppressing rebellions, and defending his borders. He had secured his empire, subdued his rivals, and signed a significant 10-year peace treaty, the Peace of Szeged, with his primary European adversary, the Kingdom of Hungary. Having lost a beloved son, Alaeddin, he seemed to have lost his appetite for the burdens of rule. In an act that stunned the courts of Europe and the Middle East, Murad II made an extraordinary decision. He chose to abdicate, to voluntarily give up the most powerful throne in the Islamic world. He handed the reins of the empire to his 12-year-old son, Mehmed. This was not a decision made lightly. Murad was a man of deep piety and introspection. He yearned for a life of contemplation, study, and peace, away from the endless demands of the court and the battlefield. He retired to the quiet city of Manisa in Anatolia, intending to live out his days with scholars and Sufi mystics. For him, this was not an act of weakness, but a personal spiritual quest. He believed he had fulfilled his duty. He had stabilized the empire, secured a decade of peace with his most dangerous foe, and placed his promising young son on the throne under the guidance of trusted viziers like the powerful Chandala Halil Pasha. He thought his work was done. The abdication was a profound statement. In a world where rulers clung to power until their dying breath, often being assassinated by their own kin, Murad's voluntary retirement was almost incomprehensible. It spoke to his unique character, a blend of immense authority and personal humility. However, his dream of a tranquil retirement was to be short-lived. The news of a child sultan on the Ottoman throne was seen not as an opportunity for peace, but as a moment of supreme weakness by the Christian powers of Europe. The ink on the Peace of Szeged was barely dry when plans were made to break it. The promise of a decade of peace was shattered by the promise of an easy victory. Encouraged by the papacy and spurred on by the belief that an oath made to an infidel was not binding, King Ladislaus of Hungary and the brilliant general John Hunyadi assembled a new Crusader army. They saw a golden opportunity to drive the Ottomans out of Europe once and for all. The threat was immense. The Crusaders began to march deep into Ottoman territory in the Balkans, their advance largely unopposed. The young Sultan, Mehmed II, and his advisors in the capital of Edirne were in a state of panic. The empire, which his father had spent a lifetime securing, was on the brink of disaster. The quiet life Murad had sought was about to be violently interrupted by the call of duty. The Crusader army, a formidable coalition of Hungarian, Polish, Wallachian and other European forces, marched relentlessly through the Balkans. Their goal was clear: to annihilate Ottoman power in Europe and break the empire's grip on the region. In the capital, the young Mehmed II, though full of the fire and ambition that would later define him, was too inexperienced to handle a crisis of this magnitude. His chief minister, Chandala Halil Pasha, profoundly distrustful of the boy sultan's aggressive tendencies and recognizing the gravity of the situation, sent urgent pleas to Manisa. The message was simple and desperate. The empire needed its true sultan. Murad was the only one who could unite the army and face the legendary commander, John Hunyadi. According to legend, the young Mehmed himself, frustrated by the indecision of his ministers, sent a now famous letter to his father. "If you are the Sultan, come and lead your armies," he wrote. "If I am the Sultan, I hereby order you to come and lead my armies." Whether the story is true or not, it captures the essence of the crisis. Reluctantly, Murad II put aside his life of contemplation and answered the call. He crossed the Bosphorus, reportedly with the help of Genoese ships that charged an exorbitant fee, and resumed command of the Ottoman forces. His return sent a jolt of confidence through the ranks. The seasoned veteran was back. The father had returned to save the son's inheritance. The two armies finally met on November 10th, 1444, on a plain near the Black Sea port of Varna. The ensuing battle would become one of the most decisive in Ottoman history. The Crusader forces, confident after their initial successes, launched a fierce attack. For a time, it seemed they might prevail. The Christian knights, led by Hunyadi, smashed through the Ottoman lines, and the situation looked grim for Murad. But the Sultan, positioned at the center of his army with his elite Janissary corps, remained a bastion of calm and resolve. He held the line, a steady anchor in the swirling chaos of battle. The turning point of the Battle of Varna came with a moment of royal recklessness. The young King Ladislaus of Hungary, seeing Murad's personal standard, led a desperate, heroic charge directly at the Sultan himself, hoping to end the battle with a single blow. It was a fatal mistake. The king's charge was cut off by the disciplined Janissaries. Ladislaus was unhorsed and killed, and his head was displayed on a spear. The sight of their dead king shattered the morale of the Crusader army. What had been a battle turned into a rout. The Ottoman victory was total and devastating. Murad II had not only saved his empire, he had crushed a major European crusade and decisively reasserted Ottoman dominance in the Balkans for decades to come. While the Battle of Varna cemented his reputation as a great military commander, Murad II's legacy extends far beyond the battlefield. He was a man who understood that a great empire needed a soul, a cultural identity that was as strong as its armies. Following his victory, he once again retired to Manisa, leaving the throne to Mehmed, but was again recalled to power in 1446 by the Janissaries, who were dissatisfied with the young Sultan. During this second, final period of his rule, he focused heavily on cultural and architectural patronage. He presided over a golden age of Ottoman art, literature and architecture, transforming his capital, Edirne, into a vibrant centre of learning and creativity. Murad was a great patron of poetry and scholarship. He spoke several languages and surrounded himself with talented writers, historians and theologians. His court became a magnet for intellectuals from across the Islamic world. He commissioned translations of important scientific and literary works from Arabic and Persian into Turkish, helping to develop and enrich the Ottoman Turkish language as a vehicle for high culture. This was a deliberate policy to create a distinct Ottoman literary tradition. He was not merely a consumer of culture, he was an active participant, a ruler who believed in the power of words and ideas to shape a society and glorify a dynasty. His support laid the groundwork for the incredible cultural flourishing that would occur under his successors. His most visible legacy, however, is etched in stone and mortar. Murad II was a prolific builder. He commissioned the construction of magnificent mosques, bridges, public baths, hammams, and charitable complexes known as imarets throughout his empire. One of his most famous constructions is the Üç Şerefeli Mosque in Edirne. With its three-balconied minaret, an architectural innovation at the time, and its grand central dome, it was a bold statement of Ottoman power and piety. These building projects were not just for show. They were practical infrastructure that served the public. The imarets, for example, were soup kitchens that provided free food to the poor, students and travellers, reflecting the Sultan's own piety and sense of social responsibility. These architectural works served a dual purpose. On one hand, they were expressions of his deep Islamic faith, providing places for worship and charity. On the other hand, they were powerful symbols of Ottoman imperial authority. By building grand, permanent structures in cities like Edirne and Bursa, he was physically stamping the Ottoman identity onto the landscape, transforming them from conquered Christian cities into proud Islamic capitals. This fusion of piety, charity, and imperial power was the hallmark of his reign. He built not just for his own time, but for eternity, creating a physical and cultural landscape that would define the Ottoman Empire for centuries. After his definitive victory at the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448, another crushing defeat for John Hunyadi, Murad II's position was unassailable. He had secured the empire's Balkan frontiers and solidified its power beyond any immediate challenge. The final years of his reign were a period of relative peace and stability, a time he used to further consolidate his administrative and cultural projects. He had weathered every storm, defeated every rival, and transformed a vulnerable state into a formidable empire. He had fulfilled his duty, not once, but multiple times. He had taken the fractured inheritance from his father and would pass on a powerful, unified, and confident state to his son. In February 1451, at his winter palace in Edirne, Sultan Murad II died of a stroke. He was 47 years old. His death was peaceful, a quiet end for a man whose life had been filled with the clamour of war. He was buried not in a grand mausoleum in the capital, but in a simpler tomb in Bursa, next to a mosque he had built. In a final act of humility, he requested that his tomb be left open to the sky, so that the rains of heaven could fall upon his grave, and that he be buried surrounded by reciters of the Quran. It was a fitting final wish for a man who balanced the immense power of a sultan with the deep piety of a humble believer. His death brought his son, now 19 years old, to the throne for the second and final time. This was no longer the boy sultan of 1444. This was Mehmed II, a young man forged by his father's tutelage, hardened by his earlier deposition, and burning with an ambition that dwarfed even Murad's. Murad II had provided his son with the perfect inheritance, a loyal and disciplined army, a stable and centralized state, secure borders, and a full treasury. He had cleared the board of major threats, allowing Mehmed to focus his entire energy on the one great prize that had eluded his father, the city of Constantinople. The legacy of Murad II is that of the essential bridge. He is the sultan who stands between the early formation of the empire and its glorious imperial age. While his son, Mehmed the Conqueror, would capture the world's imagination by conquering Constantinople, it was Murad who made that conquest possible. He was the architect who drew the plans, laid the foundations, and assembled the materials. His reign was a testament to resilience, duty, and a long-term vision. He may not be as famous as his son, but in the grand story of the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Murad II was the quiet, indispensable force who shaped the future and set the stage for greatness. His work ensured that the House of Osman would not just survive, but would go on to build one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known.